The moment Vivienne walked into that boardroom and saw him standing at the head of the table, her stomach dropped so fast, she had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. Because the man now holding a laser pointer and smiling calmly at a room full of her colleagues was the exact same man she had humiliated in front of half of downtown Toronto less than 16 hours ago. She had thrown a glass of wine on him. Not a splash, not an accident. She had looked him dead in the eye and poured an entire glass of Sauvignon Blanc directly onto his very expensive-looking shirt. And now he was her new managing director. Vivienne Ashby had always believed, in some quiet, practical corner of her heart, that the universe operated on a kind of ruthless efficiency. Good choices led to good outcomes. Careful decisions protected you. She had built her entire adult life on that principle. She kept her friendships small and deliberate, her apartment clean and organized, her career advancing on a clean upward trajectory at Meridian Consulting in Toronto. She did not do impulsive. She did not do dramatic. She was the woman her mother Carol called the sensible one at every family dinner, and she had always taken that as a compliment, which made what happened at Harbour & Co. on Friday night so thoroughly unlike her that she still wasn't sure how to explain it to herself. It had started, as most disasters in Vivienne's life had, with her best friend Tamsin. Tamsin worked in marketing at a tech startup in the financial district and had recently landed the campaign of her career, a national rollout for a wellness brand that had been years in the making. The client loved her. Her boss loved her. Everything was finally falling into place. So when Tamsin texted Vivienne on Thursday afternoon and said, "Friday night, Harbour & Co., we're celebrating, no excuses," Vivienne had said yes before she even finished reading the message. She liked seeing Tamsin happy. Tamsin's happiness was one of the steadier things in her life. Harbour & Co. was the kind of bar that looked effortless and cost a fortune. Dark wood, warm lighting, bartenders who knew what clarified meant. Vivienne wore a navy blazer over a silk top and arrived exactly on time, which in Tamsin's world meant she was 20 minutes early. She found a corner booth, ordered a glass of wine, and waited. Tamsin arrived flushed and glowing with two colleagues from her office. Petra, from accounts, and a newer hire named Devin. And within the first hour, the four of them had settled into the comfortable rhythm of good food, better drinks, and the kind of laughter that doesn't require any effort. Vivienne felt herself relax in a way she didn't always manage on weeknights. Then Tamsin excused herself to use the restroom, and everything shifted. Vivienne noticed it before she could name it. A man had crossed the room and stopped just behind Devin, leaning in close, saying something that made Devin's shoulders tighten. Devin laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh, the kind you deploy when you're trying to make something go away without causing a scene. Petra had gone quiet. The man leaned closer. Vivienne set down her glass. She didn't think. She picked up her nearly full wine and crossed the few steps between them, placed herself squarely between Devin and the man, and said in a voice that was far calmer than she felt, "I think she's asked you to give her some space." The man turned to look at her. He was tall, dark-haired, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of composed expression that suggested he was very rarely caught off guard. He looked at her for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. "I wasn't talking to you," he said. "Not aggressive, just factual." "No," Vivienne said. "But she was asking you to stop talking to her, and you weren't listening, so here we are. You misread the situation. Then, I apologized to her," Vivienne said, "not to you." He opened his mouth to say something else, and that was when Tamsin came back, saw the triangle of tension in the corner of the bar, and said, loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Viv, is there a problem?" The man glanced between them. His jaw tightened slightly. He said, "There's no problem," and turned to walk away, but he stepped directly into Vivienne's arm, the one still holding her wine glass, and the entire contents went down the front of his shirt. There was a second of absolute silence. Vivienne looked at the spreading stain. She looked up at his... She should have said, "I'm so sorry, it was an accident," because most of it had been. She should have offered a napkin. She should have done anything other than what she actually did, which was stand her ground, look him in the eye, and say nothing at all. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he left. Devin grabbed Vivienne's arm. "Oh my God, Viv, do you know who that was?" Vivienne shook her head. "That's Callum Reed," Devin whispered. "He runs Reed Strategic. He's a big deal." Vivienne did not know who Reed Strategic was. She said so. Devin stared at her. "He bought Meridian." The wineglass in Vivienne's hand suddenly felt very heavy. "He bought Meridian Consulting," Devin repeated slowly. "Your company. That Reed." Vivienne set the glass down on the nearest flat surface. "Oh," she said. Tamsin, to her credit, did not laugh until they were outside. Vivienne did not sleep well. She lay in her apartment on Spadina, and ran through scenarios the way she always did when something went wrong, methodically, looking for exits, looking for angles. Maybe he wouldn't recognize her. Meridian had 80 employees. Maybe he'd never come into the office at all. Maybe she could request a transfer to the Vancouver team. Maybe she could emigrate. At 6:15 in the morning, she gave up on sleep, made a very strong coffee, and messaged her mentor and closest friend at Meridian, an older woman named Harriet, who had been there since the company's early days and knew where every body was buried. Harriet was already awake. She was always awake and replied within 2 minutes. New MD arrives Monday morning for a firm-wide address. All hands required. Also, Viv, please tell me you did not. Vivienne stared at her phone, then she typed back. How do you already know? Devin has a big mouth. Also Twitter. Also someone filmed it. Vivienne put her phone face down on the kitchen counter and finished her coffee standing up. She arrived at the Meridian offices on King Street West at 8:45 Monday morning, 15 minutes before the all-hands was scheduled to begin. She wore her sharpest gray suit, the one she'd bought for client presentations, and she straightened her shoulders in the elevator and told herself that she was a professional with 6 years of strong performance reviews, and she would handle this with dignity. Then the elevator opened and Callum Reed was standing directly in her eye line, talking to the head of HR. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. His expression did not change. That was the most unnerving part. He just looked at her with that same composed, unreadable stillness, and then he looked away and continued his conversation. Vivienne walked to her desk, sat down, and stared at her computer screen for approximately 3 minutes without seeing it at all. The all-hands meeting happened in the large glass boardroom on the 4th floor. Callum stood at the front and spoke for about 20 minutes. Clear, unhurried, direct. He talked about the acquisition in practical terms. He wasn't there to restructure. He was there to build. He valued the existing team, believed in Meridian's client relationships, and would be spending his first few weeks in listening mode. He had a dry, understated sense of humor that surfaced twice, and both times it landed, and Vivienne hated that it landed. He did not look at her once during the entire address, which was somehow worse than if he had. After the meeting, her colleague Brent fell into step beside her in the hallway. Well, he said, he seems decent. What do you think? I think I need another coffee, Vivienne said. There's already a rumor going around, Brent added, lowering his voice with the particular relish of someone who loves an office rumor. Apparently someone at Harbor & Co. on Friday night spilled wine all over him, like intentionally. People do impulsive things sometimes, Vivienne said. Brent looked at her sideways. You know something. I know I need that coffee, she said, and turned toward the kitchen. She kept her head down for the rest of Monday. Tuesday was fine. Wednesday, she started to think that maybe this was going to be manageable, that he was going to be professional about it, and she was going to be professional about it, and the universe was going to let this one thing go. On Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. It was Harriet. He's asked for a meeting with the senior account leads tomorrow morning, Harriet said. You're on the list. Vivienne closed her eyes. Of course I am. You're good at your job, Viv. Just be good at your job. I poured wine on the man, Harriet. Yes. And yet the company still moved forward with the acquisition, so perhaps there is something to be learned from that about resilience. Vivienne laughed despite herself. The meeting the next morning was in the smaller conference room. 8 people around a table, Callum at one end with a legal pad and a pen. He went around the room and asked each person what they felt was Meridian's single greatest asset and single greatest missed opportunity. He listened without interrupting. He wrote things down. When he got to Vivienne, he paused for just a fraction of a second, just long enough for her to notice. Then he said, Vivienne. The asset is our long-tenure client relationships, she said, keeping her voice even. The missed opportunity is that we've been so focused on retention that we've underinvested in acquisition strategy for the past 2 years. We're not growing our client base. We're just maintaining it, and maintenance is not a growth model. There was a brief silence. That's the most specific answer I've gotten today, Callum said. He wrote something on his legal pad. He moved to the next person. He did not say anything else to her for the rest of the meeting, but afterward, when the room was emptying, he stopped beside her chair. I'd like to revisit what you said, he told her. About acquisition strategy. Do you have time this afternoon? Vivienne looked up at him. Yes, she said. 4 o'clock, he said. My office. He walked out, and Vivienne sat in the empty conference room for another full minute before she trusted her legs enough to stand. The 4 o'clock meeting lasted 2 hours. He asked real questions and actually waited for the answers. He pushed back when he disagreed and said so clearly, without edge. She pushed back when she disagreed and he didn't flinch. He leaned in, engaged, wrote more notes. By 5:30, they had the skeleton of what would eventually become a full growth strategy proposal, and Vivienne walked out of his office feeling the specific kind of tired that comes from using your brain at full capacity. She was nearly at the elevator when he called after her. "Ms. Ashby." She turned. He was leaning in his office doorway, jacket off, arms crossed. "For what it's worth," he said, "I wasn't doing anything she didn't want me to do. We knew each other, it was a misread." Vivienne held his gaze. "Devon didn't look like she wanted it. I know what it looked like," he said. "And I understand why you did what you did." A pause. "I would have done the same thing." She didn't know what to say to that. She nodded once, turned, and got in the elevator. She called Tamsin from the parking garage. "I genuinely don't know what's happening," Vivienne said. "Oh, I know exactly what's happening," Tamsin said. "And I think it's going to be very inconvenient for you." Tamsin, Vivienne. "You just spent 2 hours voluntarily talking to him about strategy, and you're calling me from the parking garage instead of going home. That's not a professional update call. That's a feelings call." Vivienne leaned against a concrete pillar. "I barely know him." "You knew him well enough to pour wine on him. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" Tamsin said. "You don't do impulsive, Viv. You never do impulsive. And you did impulsive for him." Vivienne did not have a good answer for that. Over the following month, they worked together more than was strictly necessary, and both of them knew it. They met twice a week for the strategy proposal. They emailed in the evenings, back and forth about clients and projections, and once, unexpectedly, about a book they'd both apparently read. Callum was methodical and precise and had a habit of being completely right about things, in a way that should have been irritating, and was instead, infuriatingly, something she looked forward to being challenged on. She learned things in pieces. His company was based in Calgary. He'd built Reed Strategic over 10 years from a 2-person consultancy into something substantial. He traveled constantly. He had a younger sister in Vancouver named Blythe, with whom he was apparently very close. He drank his coffee black and brought his own French press to the office, which the rest of the team found eccentric and which Vivienne found privately charming. She tried not to find it charming. She failed. What she did not learn for a long time was that her close colleague at Meridian, Weston, who had been there almost as long as she had, who she trusted, who she had once covered for when he missed a client deadline, had been quietly working against her for months. It started before the acquisition. Weston had wanted the senior strategic lead position that Vivienne had eventually been given. He'd smiled and congratulated her, and then, apparently, begun making small, steady choices designed to undermine her. A forwarded email taken out of context. A comment to a client about mixed signals on Meridian's direction, attributed vaguely to a senior team member. A suggestion, floated in passing to Harriet, that Vivienne's judgment had become erratic lately. Maybe personal stress, who could say. None of it landed hard enough to notice until Callum told her. He called her into his office one afternoon in late November, closed the door and said, "I want to show you something." He opened his laptop and turned it to face her. It was an email, forwarded to him by someone in the Calgary office who had received it from Weston. It presented a version of the acquisition strategy that was mostly Vivienne's work, reframed as Weston's contribution, with her name mentioned once as a junior collaborator. Vivienne read it twice. "I wanted you to see it from me," Callum said. "Before HR does." She looked up from the screen. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, he said. "I wanted to be certain before I moved on it. And the other things? The comments to clients?" His expression shifted slightly. "We're looking into those." Vivienne sat back. She felt the specific cold clarity she always got when something moved from uncertain to concrete, the moment when the vague discomfort she'd been carrying around settled into a shape she could actually address. "What happens now? That's partly up to you," he said. "HR will handle Weston's employment, but some of the client relationships will need to be managed carefully. I'd like you to lead that process if you're willing." She looked at him. "You're not pulling me off the strategy project?" "Why would I do that?" he said. "It's your strategy." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me directly. I wasn't going to tell you any other way," he said, simply, like it was obvious. She stood to leave. She was at the door when he said Vivienne. She turned. He looked at her for a moment. That same steady, unreadable look she'd learned actually meant the opposite of unreadable if you knew what you were looking at. "I know the timing of all of this has been complicated, but I want to be straightforward with you about something else too." She waited. "The reason I've been requesting your input on everything is not entirely professional." The room was very quiet. "I didn't know how to handle it any other way," he said. given everything. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. That's very honest of you. I'm usually honest, he said. Sometimes inconveniently. I've noticed, she said. She held his gaze. For what it's worth, neither is mine. Entirely professional. She left before either of them said anything else, and stood in the hallway with her back against the wall for approximately 10 seconds, eyes closed, before she walked back to her desk. Weston resigned 3 days later, before HR completed their process. He sent a brief email to the team that said he was pursuing other opportunities and wished everyone well, and was gone by Friday. A few colleagues seemed surprised. Harriet was not surprised. Vivienne was not surprised. She was mostly tired. Tired of having carried the weight of something she hadn't even known was there. Tamsin brought wine to Vivienne's apartment on Saturday. They sat on the couch with Carol on speakerphone. Vivienne's mother had a habit of being on speakerphone during important conversations, which Vivienne had long since stopped trying to prevent, and Tamsin narrated the last 3 months with the confidence of someone who had been watching this develop from a front row seat. So he told you himself, Carol said. About the colleague? Yes, Vivienne said. And he told you the other thing. Mom, Vivienne, I'm just mapping the situation. The other thing was very restrained, Vivienne said. It was barely a statement. From a man who is apparently very restrained, Carol said, barely statement is practically a declaration. Tamsin pointed at the phone. She's right. I know she's right, Vivienne said. I'm choosing not to engage with it until I know how I feel. How do you feel? Tamsin asked. Vivienne picked up her wine glass. She thought about the 2-hour meeting that had somehow never felt like work, about the email that she hadn't asked him to show her, but that he'd shown her anyway. Because he thought she should know. About the way he'd said I would have done the same thing in an empty hallway, about an act that had upended both of their professional lives, and managed to make it sound like simple fact. Terrified, she said honestly. That tracks, Tamsin said. Carol said, Vivienne Ann Ashby, you have been sensible your entire life. The universe occasionally sends you something that is not the sensible choice, and that is not the problem, that is the point. Vivienne stared at the ceiling. When did you get wise? I have always been wise, Carol said. You just stopped calling me enough to notice. She did not do anything dramatic. That wasn't who she was. She sent him an email the following Monday morning, professional in format, 6 sentences long, that proposed extending the strategy project into Q1, and suggested they schedule a proper working session to formalize the proposal for the board. At the very end, after the professional part, she added a 7th sentence. Also, I've been thinking about what you said on Thursday. And I think you should know that I have too. She sent it before she could reread it a 3rd time. He replied in 11 minutes. The first 4 paragraphs were about the strategy project and the Q1 timeline and the board proposal. The last sentence said, Thursday evening. Not a work dinner. She wrote back, Thursday evening. He replied, I'll pick a place that doesn't serve Sauvignon Blanc. She laughed out loud, alone at her desk, in a way that made Harriet look up from across the office with a small, knowing smile that Vivienne did not acknowledge. The Thursday dinner lasted 4 hours. Then there was a second one. Then there was a walk along the waterfront on a cold December afternoon that neither of them had planned to turn into 3 hours, but that became 3 hours anyway, because neither of them suggested stopping. He told her about building Reed Strategic, from nothing in a city where he knew no one. She told him about the 6 years at Meridian, that she had given completely and honestly, and that had almost been taken from her by someone she'd trusted. He was a careful listener in a way she hadn't expected, not waiting for his turn to talk, but actually following her, asking the next question from inside what she'd just said, rather than from wherever his own thoughts had already gone. She called Carol from her car afterward and said, Okay, I understand what you meant. Carol said, I know you do. I'm still terrified, Vivienne said. Of course, Carol said. But Viv, you threw wine on the man in a bar because a friend looked uncomfortable, without stopping to think about it, without calculating the outcome. You didn't do that because you're reckless. You did that because your instincts are good, and you trusted them. A pause. Maybe try that again. Vivienne sat in the parking lot of her building for a moment after they hung up, the December dark pressing against the windows, and thought about instinct and calculation and the particular courage it sometimes took to stop doing the math and just move. By February, the board had approved the full acquisition strategy. It was received with a unanimity that surprised everyone except Callum, who had apparently expected it, and Vivienne, who had known the proposal was right. The morning after the board meeting, Callum walked into the open office with 2 coffees. His, black, hers, the oat milk flat white she always ordered, and set hers on her desk without comment, in front of Harriet and Brent and everyone else, and the office had the particular charged quiet of a room full of people pretending not to notice something. Harriet did not pretend. She raised an eyebrow at Vivienne with the serene authority of someone who had been right about something for months. Spring arrived the way it always did in Toronto. Sideways, tentative, still cold enough to need a coat, but with a quality of light that was unmistakably different. Vivienne was good at her job and she knew it, and the strategy she had built was being implemented and producing results. And the person she was building her evenings around was the same person she was building her professional best work with. And she did not know how she had arrived at a life that felt this coherent. She told Tamsin that one evening at the same bar where all of it had started. Harbor & Co., same corner booth. Tamsin looked around at the room. Wild that it started here. I spilled wine on my future managing director in a bar to protect you, Vivienne said. And now I'm having a feelings conversation in the same bar. Yes, it is wild. To be fair, Tamsin said, Devon handled her own situation. You mostly just made it worse and then better simultaneously. That's sort of my thing, Vivienne said. Tamsin clinked her glass against Vivienne's. Yeah, she said. It really is. They sat in the warm noise of the bar and Vivienne thought about the version of herself who had arrived here 8 months ago. Deliberate and practical, and proud of having engineered a life with very few variables. She didn't think that woman had been wrong, exactly. She just hadn't known what she was leaving out. There was a message on her phone when she got home. Callum, who was in Calgary for the week, how was the bar? She typed back. Strange. Good. The Sauvignon Blanc was fine. I'll allow it, he wrote. She set her phone on the nightstand and turned off the light, and she fell asleep, thinking that the most carefully planned version of her life had never once felt like this. Like something that was actually, genuinely hers.